Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast. This is episode 171, The Culture of Choral Musicianship with David Hill. This week I have the honor of crossing the pond virtually to discuss the profound yet often overlooked concept of vocal musicianship. Joining me is distinguished guest David Hill, whose passion and advocacy for choral music spans from the professional to the amateur singer, and everything in between. David is the conductor of London's renowned Bach Choir. We discuss a variety of advocacy topics that David and I are both passionate about, including the importance of amateur and youth choirs maintaining a high level of quality. Why does that matter? We'll talk about it more in the episode, but a teaser is that for a lot of people, their only exposure to choral music is through their children's choir or a community choir or their church choir. Their opinion about the value of choral music stems from that first encounter with choral music. So that's just a hint. We will talk about that later. We also discussed disparities in payment faced by singers at the professional level compared to their instrumental counterparts. In this topic, we dive into the recent controversy with the BBC singers and their loss of funding or near loss of funding and how the choral community fought back. David also shares his thoughts about reaching out to new audiences and expanding our concept of what choir building means. So stay tuned. This is a jam-packed episode full of lots of ideas from a really great luminary in our choral profession. Many of my American listeners might be less familiar with David's work, but if you are in that category, I strongly encourage you to jump into the show notes, click on the link to David's bio, and read about some of the things that he's accomplished and check out some of the recordings of his choirs. So stick around and listen to this conversation with David Hill. Are you tired of managing multiple platforms to sell tickets, fundraise, and market your performances? Look no further than Ludus.com, an all-in-one solution that's easy to use and free to your organization. With Ludus, you'll have access to a suite of tools and resources specifically designed for the performing arts. From ticket sales to merchandise and fundraising, Ludus has got you covered. So why not give it a try? Save time, money, and resources. Choralosophy listeners can go to ludus.com/choralosophy for an upgrade for free to their marketing suite. Did you know that listening to this show is like a golden ticket for discounts? You can get discounts when you sign up, you and your students, at sightreadingfactory.com, and you can plug that code in every year to keep that 10% discount going and support the show all at the same time. You can do the same thing at mymusicfolders.com every time you order the best choir folders on the market. You can do that at Graphite Publishing and EndeavorMusicPublishing.com when you order some of the best online printable sheet music in the industry. All of these websites will allow you to enter Choralosophy at checkout to get a discount. So make sure you do yourself and the show a favor by remembering to do that every time. If you are a Choralosophy listener who finds value in this content, in the resources, and just in the conversation, you might consider supporting at Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Choralosophy and sign up to support the underlying costs of this show. It is a huge deal for me when you do that, and it shows your thanks, but it also helps me continue to do this. The show is produced on Patreon by Venture Studios, Ryan Main, Michael Heron, Kyle Peterson, Stephen Kathy Kakachik, David Kowalczyk, Max Jackson, Ulrika Igrain Munoz Alarcon, John Warner, Angie Schilling, Nathan Hines, Jared Hendricks, Brian Long, and Jonah Clixbull. All right, everyone, I'm here with David Hill from across the pond over in UK, and we are going to be touching base on why choral music, why advocate for choral music, and maybe just a little bit of our own personal stories as to why we believe choral music is so important and worth talking about on a podcast and expecting people to listen to people talk about choral music. I mean, really, that must mean choral music is pretty important. So, David, welcome.
It's great to be here with you, Chris. Thank you.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about you first, just kind of your biographical information, what you do professionally, as well as kind of where you grew up and what any part of your story that you'd like to share.
Okay, well, I'll be brief about all of this. I grew up in the northernmost part of England in a place called Carlisle, which is about as close as you can get to Scotland, as you know, just a few miles away, really. And had a great upbringing. My family were very supportive of singing in the church choir and all of that stuff. And I also got playing the piano. I was very, very small. I was having lessons by the time I was 4, and then violin when I was 8, and so on. And then Carlisle's a long way from anywhere really. And it's 120 miles south to Manchester, and all the Mancunians, they call themselves Mancunians. They all think that they're in the north part of England. Actually, I kept saying to them, and actually it takes a long time to get to you. So I went to then a school in 1969, which was just beginning as a nationally sort of and I suppose a national music school. By that stage, it hadn't won government support, but it wasn't many years later before it did. But my local authority in Carlisle, they really helped me get going in this place with 40 musicians. Myself was one of them. And we walked through these gates of this very old foundation school that suddenly turned itself into a music school, and it's now probably our premier institution for young musicians between 5, 6 to 18, 19. And it was formative, really. I mean, that was the thing. All the passion that I had for music was suddenly channeled into really rigorous lessons on the piano and the violin and singing. Well, singing was a very important part of what we were doing. I sang in the cathedral choir. The cathedral was just over the road for a year until my voice, I don't say break because I hate that term, but went down, and so on. So all of this was just so really important. And I left Chetham's. I went to Cambridge University, where I became an organ scholar at the St John's College, Cambridge, with a great choral foundation and a great leader in those days, a man called George Guest, great mentor. And then through that, I then went into. I did decide to stay in, if you like, within the organ world, because I've become also an organist and love it, pianist and harpsichordist and so on. So I stayed in that, but I've stretched myself in other respects, and I took conducting lessons and what I call the old-fashioned, if I could call it that, going back even to sort of Bruckner's time or Bach's time, whatever, where you would be a multifaceted musician in your own space. You'd be able to do this, you'd be able to do that, you arrange, you play, you whatever, you turn up and do it. So that's me, really. And then I got a series of cathedral appointments, beginning as an assistant in a beautiful cathedral in the northeast of England, Durham Cathedral, which is one of the great buildings in the world, to be honest. And then up into actually down, I have to say, and we go to London, into London and Westminster Cathedral, which is don't get muddled up with Westminster Abbey. When we did our first tour to America, Westminster Cathedral, I think we were packed out because I think a lot of people thought we were Westminster Abbey, not Westminster Cathedral. But it's a great choral foundation, and I loved my time with them. And then I went into the south of England to Winchester Cathedral, which anyone knows. Winchester Cathedral, you're letting me down. That old song there. Well, that's all about Winchester Cathedral, where I was director of music and organist for 15 years. Now, that was a time when I started to really spread myself a bit more by conducting more, if you like, masterworks, if you could use that, or big choral and orchestral works with a good choir and great symphony orchestra down on the coast 40 miles away called the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra, which I'm now very privileged to be associate guest conductor, and we've created this great relationship and recorded with them and so on. So that's been my life. And then I ended up back at St John's for 4 years as director of music, and then finally, at the age of 50, I sort of grew up and decided it was time to go freelance. And I became the principal conductor of the BBC Singers in London for 10 years, and surrounded myself with lots of other things that I do, playing or conducting or whatever, really. And I'm very happy in all of these areas, and promoting choral music, of course, which is the sort of the heart of what my life is about.
Yeah. Wow. That's a storied history there. Now, you mentioned BBC Singers there. And of course, recently, a lot of choral music fans around the world would recognize that there was some controversy surrounding BBC Singers and funding loss and a big pushback to save the choir. What was your take on all of that? How did you feel as that was all unfolding?
Yeah, I I knew what was happening because my friends who were in the sort of management area were keeping me informed, actually by text usually, and saying, things aren't looking good, and can you help in any way by being outspoken about it? And in my small way, of course, I just joined what ended up being tens of thousands, probably actually probably now hundreds of thousands from around the world who were kind of just aghast with incredulity as to why you would, in the corporation, which is the BBC, why they want to just lose 18 singers from their roster of 500 professional musicians. So you have to, as I pointed out to people, that there's no policy behind that. That's just simply targeting a group,
Right.
and of course, when I left, well, no, rather, when I was coming towards leaving my period of time as a principal conductor, and I stated all along the way, I will do 10 years, but I won't do more, because I think anyone, even with an orchestra, if you're as a principal conductor or whatever, you start out staying your welcome after that time, I think, and you need to let someone else come in with some new ideas and fresh approach and so on. So I was aware that they were in 2016, 15, 16, 17 being targeted at even then.
Mm.
And of course, COVID's happened. So when this happened, oh yeah, gloves are off, and we all went in. Well, the person who really, I think, managed to help save them most is Simon Rattle, who decided in his post at London Symphony Orchestra that this is just ridiculous, and he personally paid for them to join him in a concert in before they would play Mahler's Ninth Symphony. He would conduct them in Poulenc's Figure Humaine, and which was a work which the singers premiered in London. It wasn't premiered in Paris. It was premiered by the BBC singers in London. And he said, "That's it. I'm going to pay for them. They're going to come and do that, and then we're going to play Mahler." Well, when all of this happened in the summer, he threatened that he would never go to conduct at the proms, certainly this year, and possibly in future years if they got rid of them. Now, that was a beginning of a kind of, I feel like, a kind of discussion that began to happen within the BBC, and it should have happened before, to be honest, as to how this could be avoided in terms of a situation that would be embarrassing. Anyway, to the BBC's credit, if I can say anything about a credit here, but at least they rolled back and said, actually, no, we won't remove them. Now, what I do know is that I'm going back happily to conduct them from time to time. I've been booked several times now into the future, so they've been given a completely new lease of life by an extremely good new controller of Radio 3, which of course has all of these orchestras and the BBC singers under its wing. So he's obviously been given, I think, a really big boost by the trustees of the BBC not to go ahead and do any of this. So it is good news in the end, but you know what? We're not having an easy time in the arts worldwide, as we all know.
Well, to me, all that story, I thought it would be a good time to divert and talk a little bit about that story because of your connection with the organization, but also because isn't it a good example of why it's important for us to be unashamedly advocating for choral music as an art form? You mentioned on the BBC's roster of 500 some musicians, and here it is, the choral singers get the axe, so to speak. And kind of, I don't know, I feel like at least in the US, we definitely have issues that are related to this also, where the choral musician is taken for granted in many ways, whereas the strings player, the brass player, people expect to pay them. And then, but people expect a singer to show up and sing for free, or why do we need to spend this kind of money on this? And in a sense, it's our job as choral musicians to explain to people why these types of programs are important. And I think, like you said, it was good news in the end, but in a lot of ways, it forced many choral musicians to have to go out and advocate for the art form. Thoughts about that?
Yeah, you're spot on. And let's be honest, choral musicians have always been the sort of poor relations, if you like,
Mm-hmm.
of the orchestral world. and I work in both actively, but I'm very aware of that. And yeah, even more so. I mean, I've got children who are professional singers, and they get paid for what they do, and I've got so many friends in this lovely part of England we live in called Rutland, and they're marvelous people. But actually, they say, "Oh, really? Did they get paid for that?" And yeah, because you know what, they have a mortgage like everyone else. And how do you, and by the way, do you think you're going to get that quality just by clicking your fingers and something just happens? So there is, if you like, I think, and what you're doing for getting all of this stuff out to the world is in a way hugely important, because it's all about education,
Mhm.
whether it's about how you educate people, and by the way, in broadening how they see choral music, or indeed see how they see music in the first instance, or whether it's just understanding why musicians exist. What are they doing? And when you sat down to see, and I say to people, when you sat down to watch that movie, what do you think? How did that music appear? Assuming it's a proper live band, as it were, not done electronically or digitally, whatever it is called. And they'll say, yeah, that's a good point. I'll say, yeah, it's very expensive to do that. And we're thrilled, for instance, that Hans Zimmer has just bought the BBC studios, by the way, where the BBC singers and BBC Symphony Orchestra rehearse. They're going to have to move to another part of London. He's bought where they are presently to convert into a new space to record even more film music, because there seems to be an absolute, I don't know, proliferation of all of that. I mean, that's massive industry is getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's fine. But it seems to me that when everyone hears a movie track and they hear great singing behind it, well, actually, the Bach Choir, I'm very proud of, has they've done Shrek, they've done all sorts of the films that people will see, and my family presently are also recording almost week by week now tracks for the new films coming out. So yeah, I think in a commercial sense, there's an understanding of that. Oh yeah, maybe people get paid for that, and certainly in the pop sense, we all know that people become rich from it, and people know that. But in the classical area, where it's sort of, isn't that a bit of a hobby? Well,
Right.
no. That's the thing. It's not a hobby. It's the real deal. And you know what? There are so many people over here I know who are in the, if you call the commercial area of music, which is really, really, as I say, burgeoning. It's really doing well, and they use all the time the best trained classical musicians they can find to do what's required. That's what they need around them, and
Mhm.
that includes choral musicians, and I call them choral musicians, not just choral singers, people who are really bright and really good. So I think it's not all bad, but the education is where it's got to be.
Right, and it's interesting because your description of the professional choral musician, and their role in all of these the recording aspects, so the movie soundtracks and all of that, and that is definitely a big part of where choral music makes its cultural impact, I guess, to the broader
Mhm.
society, right, is through the film industry. And oftentimes I say we as the choral musicians might be taken for granted as being background music, but it adds such an aesthetic. But at the same time, I still think, and I want to see what you think. You're not obliged to agree with me just because it's my show, but I feel like choral music, even with all of that broad appeal in movie soundtracks, we are fundamentally a live art form, a live acoustic art form that happens in the moment. And that brings up another one of these problems that I wanted to discuss with you: is how do we get more people to come? How do we get more people to want to see it live? And so sometimes I liken the way I would think, there's an American sport, well, really more of a Canadian sport. Hockey would be an example of this. Is a weird example, but stick with me. I would never watch hockey on television. But
Right.
I would love to go watch a hockey match at an actual ice rink where I can hear the ice scraping and feel the cold of the room and see the players, smashing up against each other as a live performance. I find hockey fascinating, but I would never turn it on television and just sit there all afternoon and watch it. And I think a lot of times people, when they come and see a phenomenal choral ensemble, they might have a similar experience. It's a question of getting them to show up and experience it for the first time. So in my experience in Kansas City, where I live, there are professional choral ensembles here that, when once somebody's in the door, people will leave that concert going, I had no idea this was so much fun to watch. Because in a lot of ways they think of choral music, like you said earlier, just like a hobby for some old people to do, or whatever, and trying to convince people that they need to just get in the door. What has been your experience with that, with the organizations that, say, the non-church organizations that you've been a part of, because church is a little bit different, but of just convincing people to come and experience that? Is that a part of your reality at all? Choralosophy listeners will remember RyanMain.com, but he has recently created EndeavorMusicPublishing.com, which is something different, something bigger, and something better. Endeavor is not a marketplace. It's a traditional publisher with a 21st century business model, which means that they have editing. Each piece is chosen and selected with accessibility in mind. Endeavor supports composers with a majority of the sales going right to the composer. Plus, there are tons of voicings to fit the needs of your program, instant downloads, full recordings, practice materials, and more. So head over to EndeavorMusicPublishing.com now and check out the catalog.
Oh, totally. And I genuinely, not because it's your show, genuinely agree with you with what you said. I think there's a constant battle, and I think it's not, just get into this too much because we've all heard enough about it. COVID didn't help anything.
Right.
And people's habits for whatever they're doing, actually, watching movies, do they go to the cinema as much as they did? No, because they download something at home.
Right.
And maybe this is also true when orchestras and others just do live relays from even Berlin Philharmonie in Germany. Fantastic, unbelievable sound they get. It's an incredible experience. You can just sit and have a glass of wine and watch it and listen to it. I think that's been a seismic change in people's attitudes to going to anything, to be honest with you. And mind you, our soccer season, as we have it going, is seemingly doing very well, and people are back on that and attending it. The Proms concerts, and for those who don't know what they are, take place every year in London at the Royal Albert Hall. Were 93% for 2 months full this year, and included many choral events. I would say things are on a slightly improving. They're on a trajectory of improvement rather than getting worse. I'm doing a concert that's coming Sunday at the Albert Hall. It's coming in Barana with 350 singers, and that's sold out. So, there are things where seemingly it's working. I know, for instance, that my daughter-in-law, who's one of the 16, it's a choir that we have in England, Harry Christopher's conducts. Their concerts are rarely anything except full, when no matter where they go. So I think what people may have in terms of their minds about choral music sometimes, maybe I'll put it bluntly, if they have any sort of recollection of a choir they thought wasn't any good, and I could think of one particularly which I was in as a boy. It's a parish church. It was I've got some tapes I'm going to get out and listen to, but if it's anything near as bad as I think it might be, I'm not surprised no one didn't really want to hear it very much. In other words, what people are put off by is bad singing and bad people, but everyone should be singing within their own areas and and enjoying themselves. But if you're actually putting yourselves out as putting something up that's really got to be good and charging professional amounts of money, proper ticket prices with good orchestras, then or whatever, or a cappella programs, just on their own, where you're requiring the virtuosity of really good trained singers, then people, I think, they can hear all of this now, particularly done very, very well, just by clicking Spotify. Up it comes, or Apple, or whoever. And the fact of the matter is, if it's done badly, people say, hmm. So I always say, we singing is the most wonderful and the most demanding way of making music.
Yeah.
And I think that there's no question of that. This is why when I go and train conductors, I'm going to the Royal Northern College this week in Manchester, I will make all the conductors sing in the group that we have that they otherwise conduct with players. And I sometimes stand by them and say, "Okay, you're singing wrong notes. You shouldn't be singing wrong notes." This sort of thing, so that they understand that singing is a muscular thing, trying to engage the mind with the sound, with where it's placed and the language. I mean, how many things have you got to concentrate on to be remotely accurate in singing? And so that's why I think that's why people underestimate it, because they don't think about the processes and the really complex equation of expectation of what we want to hear from our singers, and I say to the singers, and by the way, what you then have to communicate to anyone who's listening to you. So, in other words, it's a whole really complex set of issues. Now, when it's done well, you're totally right, and people say, "Wow, why didn't I know about that?" And of course, I think there in America, where I spent a lot of time, and at Yale, I'm very aware that the program we've been running at the Institute of Sacred Music with the program there, that many of them wonderful now professional choirs you have in North America are emerging and doing so well. I don't need to name more, are seeing great things happening. And I think improving all of the time. And I just was in Yale a few weeks ago when Donald Nally came with the crossing, and it was just superb and as good as anything anywhere in the world. And I would say that, well, actually, there is an upward curve, but it's a tough one for all of us to keep pushing. And and some people will say, just don't like it. Fine.
Right.
Well, like some people will say, don't like church music, or someone will say, I don't like opera. Well, fine. But we have to work at whatever we're doing to be the best it can be.
Yeah, no, that's a really good summary of the state of things, I think. In the US, you're right, there is a upward trend in not only the quality of the ensembles that have crept up around the country. I'm in my mid 40s, and 20 plus years ago, when I was coming out of school, the idea that I could even potentially get paid to sing in a choir was really not even a dream for me in my generation. That has changed. There maybe in the largest cities in the country, when I was 22 or 23, there would be a church-based choir that somebody could get paid to sing in the occasional type of radio choir or whatever. But for the most part, that's something that is common in the United States now. But it's interesting because we still don't quite have the culture of choral music being a professional art form that exists in the UK. So we've got some catching up to do to you all over there. I know when I visited London, I can open up the newspaper and just see a list of choral concerts that are happening on any given day of the week. And there will probably be audiences at those, whereas it's a little bit different in the United States in terms of kind of having to make an occasion out of it, so to speak, and also make an excuse for people to have to come, and so for people who want to come, and so it is an interesting thing, and I would imagine that if we were to expand the conversation beyond just the United States and the UK, we would hear a variety of different explanations of how choral music fits into the cultures that exist around the world, and ultimately, to me, what I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on is kind of putting the professional choral musician aside and kind of thinking also just about the everyday average person who would benefit from not only hearing choirs, but also by participating in them. Why is choral music, in your mind, a special art form that deserves to have people talking about it on podcasts and advocating for events and et cetera? Why does choir matter?
Well, because choir singing is an extension of speaking. It's
Hmm.
basically a vocalized form of speaking, and expresses sentiments and words that we may or may not, sorry, the fly getting in my face, words we may or may not agree with. But like opera, which a lot of it is complete and utter nonsense, it brings us nevertheless into a kind of a reality of thinking about what's happening in that moment with that story and the way it's being projected. So I do think that singing has this unique power and instruments support it. They don't make it. They make it work
Hmm.
or not, depending on whether you need them or not. What I'm suggesting is that because we're, you know, whatever belief you have in or no belief in anything, we are brought into this world, and we all have, you know, we wear different clothes, we do, we speak differently, but our voices are uniquely different. And so when I used to train children, eight o'clock in the morning, 6 days a week, to sing the many services that they used to have to sing, it was some of the best times I ever had, I have to tell you, because they were so hilarious and honest, and they would do amazing things. And just because they were, I'm talking about boys, essentially. I've also taken girls, boys between 8 and 13, for instance, admittedly in a choir school where they would do that in the morning, and then in the evening they come and then sing all of that in an amazing space with an incredible acoustic with professional um, altos, tenors, and basses behind them. Well, Choral Evensong, which we have over here, is the most attended choral event that's not a concert, as it were, in the UK week by week. It's tens of thousands who go and hear it
Hmm.
in all the different spaces. The BBC broadcasts it every week live, most weeks live from a particular place. And okay, we're only a small country, but it is the most listened to program on Radio 3 in any week.
Wow.
That live listening to Choral Evensong live on a Wednesday afternoon. I do it when I'm in Yale, by the way. It's 10 or 11 in the morning if I'm in my apartment working on something before I have to go in for other things. It's 250 odd thousand people plugged in at that moment, let alone all the pickups afterwards. Now, why am I saying this? I think there is, therefore, an understanding of its importance. But, my lovely neighbours, get back to them, I absolutely love them. I'm not sure they'll be plugging into this podcast, and so I wouldn't say anything derogatory at all, but they wouldn't necessarily understand why it was that important, except now they're beginning to. Why? Because my youngest daughter, who was at Trinity College, Cambridge for 4 to 5 years, and is now partly a professional singer with lots of the great groups, but she teaches German, French, and Latin for 3 days a week in a school. She has, of her own volition, for no money, is coming up to our area to run a children's choir, because there's no children's choir.
Wow.
And every Wednesday she comes. We have lunch if I'm here, certainly with my wife. They have lunch, and then she sees all these children in the afternoon. She's only just got it going. It's quite new, but already for the first rehearsal, she had more than 20 arrive,
That's
and
wonderful.
it's growing exponentially. And I'm doing a concert with a pro group in December in a local place, a really good London based group, coming up to sing a carol concert. But I said, bring your children in. We need to give them something to sing with the pros. So we want to put them side by side, people who are doing it for their living. So the children get a feeling that, gosh, does that really happen? And of course, the answer is it does. But, it's back to our word education again. So I think it's just that's why singing for me is an absolutely fundamental part of why we exist, and always has been, since the caveman was roaring around the cave with his, singing whatever would come to him or her.
Yeah. I mean, we, meaning humans, we are the original instrument. And it is something very primal, very fundamental to who we are as humans. In a lot of ways, though, this is a double-edged sword, because I think this is also part of why some people take singers for granted in the conversation we were having before, is because everyone has a voice. Not everyone has a violin. And so there is like there's a certain aspect of, it can't be that hard. As you were saying before, people don't just move their mouth and noise comes out. There's a lot of technique there, but it's amazing. That's an amazing story. I wonder sometimes about how, with that, how easily inaccessible singing in even the most rudimentary way can also create some type of a connection. If you've said education several times, I'll throw it out as well. If we can do a better job of educating people about what to listen for in these phenomenal ensembles that can even be mimicked by the non-trained singer. There are certain things that when we are maybe having a community group where maybe they meet once a week, and they maybe they're not going to have the time to refine the sound that maybe a school choir would or a chapel choir would, but there's still value in them coming together and singing and exploring the different beautiful noises that their body can make, and ultimately then doing it in community, being vulnerable with each other, sharing poetry with each other. I mean, these things are incredibly important. At my school that I teach, my most advanced choir during the school day is 100 kids. And in a school of 1,900 kids or so, I have about 100 of them that want to come and sing choral music every day for an hour. And
Wow.
the way I explain that, and that's just one of the choirs that I teach, but the way I explain that to them is I encourage the students, especially when we've just sung something very complicated, and we've sung it in a very refined way, and we've sung it with a high level of detail, I will pause them and I will ask them to reflect how difficult it is in today's world to get 100 people to agree on doing anything. And if we can get 100 people to agree on the shape of this phrase, or when to breathe, or what vowel to sing, then isn't that just a metaphor for the way that the world could be if we were all in choir, so to speak? And I think these are just different ways that I like to advocate for the art form by explaining to people, when's the last time your teenager was 100% focused on something other than their phone for an hour and working in perfect harmony with 100 other teenagers? How often do they do that? And of course, the answer is never, unless they're in a choir. So these are some of the things that I like to kind of express as my, like, here's why choir matters. So I'm interested too, and I'd like to kind of jump in, if we could, to having you share a little bit about what it's like to wear your hat when you work with the Bach Choir. Kind of explain a little bit about what that organization is, what its mission is, and how your choral experiences are with that group.
Okay, well, briefly, the Bach Choir was started in 1876, so it's coming up to 150 years old.
Wow.
And why did it begin? I mean, let's hit the point that a student of Mendelssohn, Felix Mendelssohn, in Leipzig, by the name of Otto Goldschmidt. Basically, Mendelssohn was on his big crusade to get Bach heard again, not just in Germany but further afield. So he kind of sent him over and said, "You've got to do something in England." It's Mendelssohn had done so many wonderful oratorios which had been premiered over here. The St. Paul and of course Elijah and other things. And I think that he was a celebrity here in the UK. loved by everyone. So he knew there was a market for choirs to kind of start to try and understand this man Bach and his music. So Goldschmidt started it, and well, I'm only the 9th musical director in nearly 150 years.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, it is incredible. And what is our mission? Well, it's certainly not the same as it was. Okay, let's put it straight out. We are a large organization. We have about 240 members of the Bach Choir, of which we will have sometimes as few as 40 and often 80 to 100. And then week next Thursday, we're doing Brahms Requiem in the Festival Hall in London, and there'll be probably 180, which, by the way, is a great number. If you can, they're not an oil tanker, that takes ages to turn. They'll move just like that. So it's getting them to know that, and they're very good at that. My illustrious and famous predecessor, Sir David Wilcox, who gave us all those choral arrangements and stuff, which he did so much for choral music in certainly in the UK and I think further afield. Then he was very good at making them lithe and active in terms of a sound and an appreciation of moving, particularly when it comes to singing Bach. So actually, some would say, what, 280 people singing Bach? Actually, it's wonderful. So we do the St. Matthew Passion every year, and roughly 90 in each choir, with a big period instrument orchestra with each, but you know what? They can do it, and they can do it at exactly the right speeds. Now, what I'm suggesting is here we have a mandate to do Bach, and the mandate originally was to do the B minor mass, which appears reasonably regularly. But that was the reason that Mendelssohn stated he wanted, Goldschmidt to come in and deal with it, because there was no Bach in the UK before that point in 1877 when.
David, I'm going to pause you for just a second because I want to get one question in before you go on with this story, if it's okay. So I want to go back to the singers real quick. You said about 200 plus that are members of the organization, but maybe on every project you don't use all the singers.
Correct.
So are they auditioned members and they are called upon when they're needed? Tell us a little bit about how that works, just because I'm curious.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. So we put on a series of concerts in every season. And we would say to all the members, this is why you join the choir. You please join us, and we'll make room for you. Well, for various reasons, we never have 240. We have sometimes up to 200, and for other and they're kind of key. What we call them core concerts, that allow everyone who is in the organization to be part of them. And then there are lots of other events which we have. We sometimes put on, but more particularly be asked to engage a group in, so where there isn't room for more than 100 or whatever, and or even if it's a particularly small event where you want some carols exquisitely sung in a particularly kind of small way, then we can run down to 30, 40. And all our singers are good. They are all auditioned, but if you're looking for a particularly small group to do a particular thing, you go to particular singers, and that works also.
I see. Okay.
And it's not to run in a divisive way. It's just so we just horses for courses, as they say. So we're looking through all of that, but they all pay a subscription to be in the choir. We do not have professional singers singing with us, so it is. That's an entirely, and that is the British way of regulating how singing works. In other words, people come along because it's a hobby. It's like joining a club or a golf club or a tennis club or whatever you like. You pay your subscription and you can go and play it. But we don't engage professional singers to be with us, because what we try to hope, and this is the other mission of the group for me, is that I genuinely try to train them to sound as, and I don't like really using the word professional, but as what I call, they need to learn how to sing in the best possible way in each of their sounds, so that they can bring as a whole something special in the sound to the audience. And that means also that we colorate them. So we, the different colored sounds that people make, some are more like an oboe, or others are like a trumpet, or others are like a flute. You mix the sound so you don't have the trumpet next to the quiet flute, because the quiet flute will never get heard. So, there's this kind of, I suppose it goes back to, it's an American thing too. Robert Shaw did it, and Eric Erickson in Sweden, where you actually tone the color, the whole sound of the choir. This is a really important thing for us. We really think this makes a difference to how everyone feels about what they're doing with their singing, that they all feel equally valued because they're standing in the right place. And I say a lot of choirs have a problem because a lot of the people are in the wrong place, and it's simply when they say, well, the blend is all wrong now, you're sticking out or whatever. Well, there's probably a really good reason for that. And if you really look into it, it's because you've put a really beautiful, I don't know, maybe like a porcelain white vase next to some garish colored thing, which that doesn't the two don't go together.
Right.
You needed to arrange your pottery in a way that they each would have its own place, and that's an analogy, I suppose. But
Right.
that's how we work it. It's a voluntary organization, and a wonderful one for that.
That's amazing. And so it's almost like, there are some choirs in the US that operate on that model as well. But I could kind of liken it to my son's baseball club. He pays a fee to be a part of the club, and he gets assigned to a coach and to a team within that club, and they play and they learn and they so in a lot of ways it makes sense as how an American would think of many of our pay to play activities that we participate in. That's very cool. And then of course recently, I don't know how recently, maybe you'll explain it, but the Bach Choir has also kind of started its own advocacy program through a podcast that you've been working on as well. So you've been joining the fray with me as a choral podcaster. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Well, we're having fun with these actually, and I think they're going quite well. So anyone who wants to listen in, what I'm doing is we're kind of ripping up a choral work that everyone kind of knows, and tries to get inside it a little bit more, so that we're trying to appeal to audiences that we've just been talking to, actually, who aren't quite sure about choral music but need to find out more. So we call it Change Your Tune. And we started with Zadok the priest just before the coronation of King Charles, and gave some of the history of it. And we've moved through things, and now to the latest one, which is Carmina Burana, and actually touching on not just why everyone likes it, but some of the darkness behind the piece. So giving people honest appraisals of what's happening. And it's the next, and there's another one that's following, and we're very excited about this, where we're talking about Christmas carols and why are carols important. And we've done a fantastic interview with John Rutter, who is for here in the UK anyway. It's sort of a bit of Mr. Christmas about him, really. And but he doesn't like that term, but you know what I mean. But he has kind of changed it, and in the most positive way. So we've got that, and we're just going to add. We can't say who it might be yet, but we're quite excited by it. If we can get this person to come on the podcast, so we're doing these because it's again part of our outreach work, because we want anyone to come to the choir, from whatever background. We don't, we really want to make sure that they can have a great experience, no matter where they've been in their lives. And it's not going to suit everyone, because there is an expectation in an auditioned choir, and that people do, ideally they've got to know how to keep on the stave. We haven't got loads of time to be digging into lots of sort of note bashing rehearsals. My eldest daughter, she's got a choir where she lives just outside of London, where she loves them to bits, and they love her. And it's just a community choir where you very correctly said they could just bear it all really with each other and just have a great time. And they have such a laugh on a Monday evening, but they put on these concerts every so often in the community, and they're also well attended because, you know, families come along to have a good time and hear what they've been doing. Later on in that evening, she goes and then does an auditioned choral society in the same town, where
Okay.
people have to pay to be in it. Or if they're both choirs, actually, they have to pay a little bit of money to be in it. But the point is, they're doing different things, but they're equally important within the community. So, your point is well taken. That, you know, there's a place for anyone in a choir. It's just got to find the right place, and we try to be as inclusive as we can for the Bach Choir in London. But, you know, we have our competitors and our colleagues, put it like that, and we see it as others colleagues. But, you know, there's the London Philharmonic Choir in London, there's the London Symphony Chorus, there's the Philharmonia Chorus. I was director of that for 13 years. You know, all these choirs are doing exactly the same thing in London, and the Royal Choral Society, and I could say a host of others. So, you know, we're all at it on usually on Monday evenings, and it's probably in London, I don't know, big 4-figure number of singers all rehearsing at the same time on Monday evening. Yeah, I think it's recovered. It's recovered from COVID. I think we can say that. And the Bach Choir, my colleagues in the Bach Choir and the trustees and all of who run it were absolutely brilliant in navigating all of that. We had rehearsals online, but we were in the process of engaging with new composers, new works during the lockdowns, that we recorded immediately we could get back. And, you know, these were from Black composers, white composers, females, males, you know, all of the stuff that we know we need to be doing. And I think as a result of which, we've come out really quite strong out of all of that.
Yeah. I think in a lot of ways, the pandemic recovery, so to speak, the choral music pandemic recovery, has been hit and miss in certain places, depending on where you are. There are some places I know that just are really still struggling to get anything going again. But I think in the places that are doing well, they are the places and the organizations that did kind of what you described, which is to try to figure out a way to make the music as relevant to the community as possible. Can we figure out a way to sell it, so to speak? And I don't mean sell it through marketing per se, although that is important for choral organizations, but to sell it in by telling the story of why this music is important, why is it relevant to today, why is it relevant to our history, why is it relevant to our community, and that choral music ultimately is a social art form. Even at the professional level, it is a social art form in a very real and very important way. And we need our audiences to also feel like, for lack of I guess better term, they are invited to the party. Like when we are the choral singers, we're having a party, and we would like you to come. And you know, and I think as long as we can get that message out there, then these organizations tend to do well getting people to participate.
I totally agree. And here's the other thing, Chris, if I could say, that singing is the only area where you can place people who do it for their hobby, amateurs, if you want to call them that, but let's say that really great singers in their own way, coming together to do something collectively in a really special way, suddenly find themselves on the stage with absolutely the top professionals in their fields and in orchestras. And so when the Bach Choir go on a festival hall stage, they're going on not with any old orchestra, it's the Philharmonia Orchestra from London. And, you know, and suddenly what the choir does is equally important, or even more important than what the choir than the orchestra is doing. In other words, the players themselves recognize it immediately. If it's good, they really play for it, and they really react to it. Now, it's that conjunction, an unusual conjunction. I mean, you know what? You couldn't easily do that on the sports field. Put a bunch of even quite well-trained amateur sports people, and they say, well, actually, you've got to go and compete with those you know, multi-million paid whatever at the same time, because it wouldn't work.
Right.
But it does work in music, and it works particularly well with singing and with professional orchestral musicians. So I have a real passion for this, that when I say to the choir, look, it's got to be as good as they are going to play for you, you know.
Hmm.
So that and that's a great aspiration, because why can't it be? And of course, I always know it will be with them. But the fact of the matter is, it's you have to train for that and know psychologically that's how it works. Because a professional choir, look, I conduct professional choirs all the time, and you expect that right to be right, because that's what they're paid for. Week by
Right.
week, day by day. Okay, so that's easy. But our community choirs, when they then join hands with their colleagues who are paid professional players, then it's a great moment.
Yeah. I like the analogy and the comparison to the professional athlete
Yeah,
with the amateur athlete. The professional athlete would run over the amateur athlete,
yeah,
whereas the professional musician can elevate the level of musicianship of the others around them. And
yeah,
the way I oftentimes explain this to young kids is that um, the professional singer, because I try to get my student singers to collaborate with professionals as much as possible. That's kind of one of my educational tools, is that the professional singer is creating a sound wave that is
yeah,
that is more powerful than yours, because with your young voice, which allows you to then surf on their wave.
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and
Totally.
whereas you're not having to create the wave all by yourself, and they can think of it in those terms of like how much energy would it take to generate the wave. Well, now with them in the room, we don't have to work quite as hard, whether it be that with a professional singer, or like you were describing, a professional orchestra.
Mm,
The choir gets to surf the wave, and it makes
mm,
it actually physically easier to sing in those types of scenarios, because the singer is no longer having to work as hard to generate that sound wave all with their own body. And so I think and then that tends to create a transcendent experience for the singer, because they are then feeling this like overwhelming sense of release, like, wow, this feels so easy, and that must mean the music is pouring out of my soul. And it is, but there's really cool physics that plays into that as well, which I find fascinating, and so
yeah,
it's so great that you're able to give your singers, your amateur singers in particular, that type of an experience.
yeah. I regard the Bach Choir in London as an extension of the very best that you can get. Um, I mean, there's some of them are, by the way, professional musicians, but most of them are not. You bring people from all walks of life. Whether I remember seeing, by the way, one of our Supreme Court, he's now retired actually, Supreme Court judges, not quite the same as the same Supreme Court in Washington, but we still have one in London. Judges next to a student who's come in, and
Hmm.
and it's so funny because I think the student turned to him and said, "So what do you do?" And he sort of said, "Well, I've been in law all my life, or whatever." But he probably didn't say, "Oh, by the way, I'm a Supreme Court judge," or because it would have frightened the young person off. But it didn't, because what it meant was that they actually the lingua franca was singing. Why were they there? Because they wanted to sing. And my view is that's the point. That it doesn't matter who you are or your background, anything. Just know that singing is the way in which it becomes a currency that you exchange, and that's why we need it.
Wow, that's great. That's wonderful, David. This has been a blast having this conversation with you. Let's wrap up by you letting us know a little bit more about where to find projects that you're engaged in. Anything you want to plug? I know that there's a new Oxford Book of Carols that you're involved in, so
Yeah.
maybe let's throw some key points out there on the way out here of what people can find out more about David Hill.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm not very good at self-publicizing, I have to say, but I'm poor at it. But my agents, Rayfield Allied in London, do a lot of what I do, and but the Bach Choir is very central to my life. Carols for choirs, I've had a blast actually with Bob Chilcott putting that together. It's taken years. We were in we met just before the lockdown, actually, and then we sifted through 350 scripts and ended up with 50 pieces. It's Choral requires 6.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why is this important? Because it's 100 years since Oxford University Press started publishing. So this is one of their flagship moments when they want to celebrate this book. Bob and I took, and we had a wonderful team of people, Robin Elton particularly at OUP, took a long time to really drill down on why we're doing this. You know, the first green book of Choral Requires 1, which Wilcox and Reginald Jakes and so on, is a Bible in its own time. 60 years ago, just over 60 years ago. But this had to be a statement about now. So embracing as much as we can the different ways in which, and by the way, I do think at the moment there's a fantastic amount of great choral music coming out from all over the world. And we saw this emerging as we saw these pieces. So in this new anthology, I'm really thrilled that there were so many wonderful North American composers, male and female, including Alfred Hellstorp, for instance, has given us a beautiful piece, and all sorts of composers. I can't say all of them, but I just thought I'd mention him. And it's such a treasury, and we're so thrilled that you know, hands across the sea on this one, I think, because this has really become quite an anthology that includes so many of friends and people I've really respected in North America, and OUP and Bob were very keen also to include. And that on December the 8th in Wolsey Hall in Yale, Schola Cantorum, which is my group at Yale, joined by brass, are going to be, and organ, are going to be singing 9 of the new carols from this anthology. And we're all very excited about it. So there it is. And you can look at Oxford University Press website, and there's even a recording with Bob conducting, and I got some of the piano parts and organ parts correct. There it is, and it's being launched next month in Oxford. But I think it's getting about, as I gather, and hopefully do join in and look at it. And then, Bach Choir website is very good. It's, you know, you may be interested to see it and see what we're doing and what we're trying to do and how we're trying to engage with the community and make things more and more relevant, but within the process of being an excellent outfit. So there we are. That's probably, is that enough?
No, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. This has been fun. David, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Oh, it's such a pleasure, Chris. Chris, thank you so much for inviting me.
Thanks so much for sticking around to the end of an episode. I'm glad you're here and I'm glad you're listening. If you enjoy this show, the best things for you to do to help are like, share, leave comments on social media, tell your friends, and of course, use the Choralosophy promo code when you shop at mymusicfolders.com, at graphitepublishing.com, endeavormusicpublishing.com, sightreadingfactory.com, and your Voce Vista sound analyzing software that you can get also in the show notes of these episodes. And of course, leave a rating, subscribe on any platform you can. Anything that you can do to help cause the visibility of the show to increase really helps us keep the lights on. And of course, don't forget to head over to Patreon and subscribe there. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.